Good evening and welcome back. I know just the other day, while listening on the radio, an interesting point was given, and I would kind of like to share with us this evening. The commentator was talking about the need for us to decrease more in our lives, when in actuality, the world that we live in today and the message it seems to portray is quite the opposite. It really is for us to increase the volume of ourselves, and I'm not talking about our weight. It's not really how the size you are. Let yourself be heard. Because the world shouts for us to be noticed, especially in this current age of social media. Now, for those of you who don't know, you may have heard of Facebook and you don't have the internet or you don't really kind of know what that is. That's another phenomenon that actually the younger generation have kind of cast aside. It's kind of a middle-aged, and now I'm kind of in that group now that tends to gravitate towards Facebook. Facebook is an opportunity, as I think the best way to describe it is if it's your face put to a book form with pictures and photos of yourself, accounts of what you're doing and doing in your life to update with a circle of friends that you may have about you. There's also a thing called Twitter. I'm not really involved in Twitter, but that's where you have your life out there and you post little things and people follow you. They follow your life sequences of what you're doing on Twitter. And you'll see this, especially if you're watching TV, you'll say, follow us on Twitter or on Facebook or all these things. And celebrities have their own Twitter accounts so you can follow the latest celebrity of what they're doing and what they're posting in their lives. And that really kind of is what is going on in today's world. The world says, it wants to know more about you. And this is not an indictment. This is more of an education, really, of kind of where we are in our society. Because if that is really the focus, and if I get the need that, well, people will actually really want to know about me if they follow me on Twitter, or if I have so many friends on Facebook. I know that when it was starting out, everybody was actually asking that, how many friends is on your Facebook account, or how many people follow you on Twitter. That's a big thing, a numbers thing, about how many. And there was a race to have as many put on there as possible. But what's going on right now in your life? What are you thinking? And it matters because people pour out their opinions and then people respond. What are you doing? In fact, it kind of gets silly, but what are you doing right now, this instant? What are you feeling? What things do you like? And we find all this, and there's other stuff that's out there, but we're saying that the world is saying, tell us more about you. Let me know about you, your likes and your dislikes. In fact, it's kind of scary because now they've attached advertisements, advertising company that pays big money to find your likes and dislikes. And I don't know if you've ever searched the internet enough. I know that my computer, because of what I type in, knows what I like. Why? Because if I've purchased Lion stuff before, which I have, guess what? They've got a little banner on the side that it will punch up little things for me to entice me to say, well, I can buy this. I'm interested in those things. And now it's tabulated of all of what you like and don't like. And so they pay big dollars to find out your likes and your dislikes. And so when we're forthcoming and tell that, then they make it a big deal as well. And I've stated this before, it's not really to pick on these. It's more of to educate ourselves of kind of the world that we live in today in contrast to where God would have us to be. Instead, what can we learn about where we are heading? What can we observe? And even with my own involvement with it, which I've told you, I have a Facebook account and I enjoy it. As I said this morning, I enjoyed seeing Brian's new twins, the updated pictures that we could get. It's a very useful tool. All of these things are wonderful, and it kind of keeps us in attachment to each other's lives on a weekly basis. And I would still like to look at it with no certain bias or prejudgment, but take a notice to a pattern in which the world uses now as quite normal. And so if we can step outside of that in a personal realm and just use a little objectivity that says, hey, everyone, look at me. I am important. I have something to say. And we understand that. But followed up, we're following those that are on our network. And after hearing this thought of us decreasing, who then is to increase? And I thought of some verses that may help us tonight. It can be a little more humbling if I'm reminded of these again. Who should be in the center of my life? Who is my life? As I mentioned in the passage this morning, it says that he who saves his life will lose it. And he who loses his life for my sake will save it. See, there's the whole thing about what's increasing and what's decreasing. Take, for example, John the Baptist at the peak of his popularity, with the masses coming to him and noticing that everyone was starting to go to Jesus. Hey, John, would you take a look around? Look, this is at the height of your popularity. You're John the Baptist. This is Jesus now starting to overshadow you. And I can say John's been doing this a lot longer. And his ministry has been dedicated, and still more of the crowds are now going to Jesus. How would we reply if we were in his shoes, if this was our whole life? This is what we geared up to have focus for John the Baptist. It was his mission. It would have been our mission, our passion. Would we kind of be like Martha, so dedicated to the work that we miss the true blessing that come in all of us? How would we react if we were in that position? Now, look at how John reacted when we see his reply in John chapter 3. If you want to turn there, if you have your Bible, John chapter 3, starting with verse 26. They came to John and said to him, Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, look, he is baptizing and everyone is going to him. Well, I love that aspect. You know, I'd say that everybody goes to Walmart. We always say that. You know, it's just because the parking lot is full. Everyone's there. You know, it's the fact I can't find a parking space, and I can't get in the checkout line because everyone is there at the same time I'm trying to go. See, the same thing. I don't know if this was trying to bait him, but he says, would you look? He is baptizing and everyone is going to him. To this, John replied, a person can receive only what is given them from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I am sent ahead of him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him, and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine and is now complete. He must become greater. I must become less. And that's really what our lesson is for this evening. Is what John got it. He understood what he was paving the way for. But can't sometimes lose our humanity in this. He must be greater. John says, I must become less. John got it by saying, I, and that's a big I must become less. He is telling them that he is not the Messiah, but just the messenger. He was sent ahead of him to pave the way. But that's what his mission was. And when it finally happens and when it comes, what will happen? I love how he says that he waits and he listens for him, never losing sight of what he was there for. And not only that, it is full of joy. And now it has come to his life. He's in a joyful moment that this has happened, that he has finally decreased and Jesus has increased. And not only have joy, but now is complete. Boy, it's nice that when we have a joy and a joy completed, that's almost kind of mission well done. So instead of my focus of being all about me, can it be now more about him and what Christ has done for me? Instead of all the where have I been and look what I've done, but look to his suffering on the cross for my sins. When you think of why we come every first day of the week, to remember that sacrifice as we did this morning, there is a great value when we come and gather around his table to remember him and to remember his sacrifices. See, I see the advantage of remembering every week to keep fresh in my mind. That's what I've mentioned before, lest I forget, lest something else takes its place. And that can happen. And no matter how often I take it, that's what he says, no matter how often you take this, do this in remembrance of me. He knew it was going to be kind of a repetition for some of us, but we can lose sight in that in the repetition alone. What is my focal point? Colossians 3 says this, since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on these things, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Another great illustration of where I am, because I love verse 3, for you died and your life is now hidden. See, it's hidden. Why? Because who should people see? When we go about our lives, we always say in a prayer that we hope that people see Christ living in me. See, we're supposed to have a different identity. We've been bought with a price. For you died in verse 3. And we don't stay dead because he writes, since we have been raised and made that new creation, now what? We set our hearts on things above and set my mind on things above. That's twofold. My heart and my mind. You ever hear that before? Said, oh, your heart and your mind, is loving God with all of our heart, with all of our mind, with all of our soul, with all of our strength. See, heart, that's what's our drive. That's our passion, to have heart. In the sports analogy, they say, if you just to give it a little more heart, when you understand deep down, going deep in ourselves to be able to gather up something. That is where our passion and our drive comes from. What motivates me comes from the heart, just like where sin is described to come from as well. Is what defiles a man is what we've placed in our heart, and then the outward appearance is evident. It says also it comes from the heart. And if the intent and desires of my heart, and then it says, I set my mind. That's where the dreams of my heart can become action, and they become a plan. I can start thinking about things. This is where now my motivation turns into action and make a conscious decision. And then Paul goes on to say, what about our life now? That we seem is so important. Is what society doesn't want to hear. It says that we've died. Our identity has changed. We've been transformed. All these words used that we're now going to decrease. And that's where God can start to increase. This life that we seem is so important has died and is raised to walk in newness of life and now is hidden. But notice it's not hidden forever. It's hidden with Christ in God. But don't worry, we don't become nameless. We don't become a nothing with no identity. We will also appear with him in glory, what we all want to have one day. It goes on to say what and how we do that. See, we still have to put to death some things in our lives, some things we do naturally, almost instinctively. Desires are just that, something that we want, and it can be over God if we let it. And that's why he says that if we truly want it over God, he will give us over to those desires. Now, that's scary. It's scary because I can want something so much that God's going to let me have it and let me enjoy it for that time. Doesn't mean that it's going to change the outcome of my life. But see, it's still a God of love and a God of choice. And he says, if that's really what your heart wants, I'm going to let you have it. I'm going to let you have it with all the gusto you have and to those very things that we want to do. Look at this in verse 5. It says, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. Now, that's a challenge. Because if it's earthly and it's a natural thing, because it says, I have to put to death what just comes naturally. And he lists some things here. Sexual immorality, which we see is always on the increase. Impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Isn't that nice where it says that evil desires and greed is idolatry? Because I said in my lesson this morning in my class, talking about that idol worship, we've always labeled it as those who worship Buddha. We've always put idols as a statue. Well, I'm not any guilt of any idolatry in my life. When it says that evil, this evil desire, lust, evil desires, and greed, all of these things, is idolatry, because it's putting that first. And because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life that you once lived. Past tense. But now you must also rid yourself of all such of these things, working on it: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. It's easy to talk about, my brother. It's easy to, with malice and slander and getting angry with our anger and rage and filthy language that, doesn't even shock us anymore. It does to me is that my head will come up to find out immediately what channel it's on. Before, it was always protected that it was the subscribe channels that you knew had language. And now I'll hear something and I say, what channel is that on? And it just amazes me more and more. It's trickled down to just common TV on our cable systems that has no filtering whatsoever. Verse 9, do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. So he says, put to death whatever is in our earthly nature. It's only natural. And people will even say that. Well, I'm just acting out in my natural way. This is what I was born with. And that's true. But comes our choice. It is what is natural. And trust me, it is difficult to put these things to death in our lives. If you honestly look in this passage, the first is everything sexual. And remember, it's a natural earthly thing. But then impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed. And just put to death these things, but rid. It says to cast away, to throw away. Also anger, rage, malice, that is me talking bad about you. Slander, same thing. Filthy language. And don't lie to each other. And a reminder, new creature thinking. You've taken off your old self with its practices and done what? Put on the new self, being renewed. It's kind of like when we take off and we rid and we put on, it's just like our clothes. If we've been working out in the mud and the dirt all day, it's always nice to come in from the day and be able to take those things off so we can throw them in the washer and get those clean. We don't want to just sit in those and stay in those. It's a new, freshing start, and that's over and over, day after day. And renewed what? In the knowledge of Christ, because in reality, many still keep chasing the dream. What I have to have out of my life, what I want it to be, what I can get out of it. And he says, quit living for yourself, God says. We keep living for what I can get. The wants in it for me, I only live once. It's always been about saving our lives, even when this was written, when they didn't even have all of the distractions that we have that I mentioned today. With the social media and phones of all kind, unlimited forms of travel, when I think all of what they didn't have, and it still was a problem. Because it's always a heart problem. We have to notice a heart problem. We always bring this up, and it's always fascinating because we always think, always go on to Americans and about how we have the richest poor in the world, and then we'll get someone that will come in and say, this jealousy and envy stuff is even in third world countries, and you scratch your head, well, how? They don't have anything. Yeah, but they have degrees of anythings just like we do. And it's fascinating when they say that the people with straw and grass houses wanted the mud houses because that was a step up, and they were envying that, and those who could get into brick and mortar from the different stages, different levels from where we're used to, but still the same class envy that we have. It's always been a heart problem, no matter their circumstances, no matter the advancements, no matter the technology or the years that can come on in our lives. Remember when we hear of these stories. But really, there's more than that. Consistently not searching for him and what God wants, but what I want. Continually finding and returning to my own identity. And that's what Jesus says in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Luke 9 this explanation to whoever would like to follow him. Verse 23 of Luke 9 says, "Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For who wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self?" See, what is it worth saving if we ultimately lose it in the end, even if we were to get it all? When, like Solomon says, it's all just vanity. And going back and finding ourselves once again, what does it get us? Death. To put it in more extremes, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit ourselves? The scripture says, gain it all and yet lose it all. And yet we don't find these words encouraging because it challenges our true selfishness. I think the bottom line is many today want a Savior, but not a Lord. And I've used that phrase before. They don't want to submit to anything. They want to be saved from all of this. They want to be saved in the end, but they don't want to submit to anything between now and then. I want to be saved from my sins, yes, but then left alone until the end of my life or judgment, letting me choose how I want to live. And I'm in no need of a Lord because I get to make all the decisions in my life. See, that's increasing. That's myself increasing. And I like being in control. It's hard to submit with a heart like that. You don't understand. I'm making decisions just fine. And looking at it truthfully, are we still looking to save our lives with that kind of attitude? And I like how Luke also uses the word forfeit. Did you ever stop and think of, what do you think of the word forfeit? That's never a good thing, especially, and I've not heard it now in the Winter Olympics, but if someone, well, I take that back. There was the best woman, I guess, in her country, I think it was from Russia, that was supposed to compete in something, found out that she had been doping. And so she could not compete in that. So she had to forfeit all of her hard work because she was using a substance that was banned from, the Olympic Committee. So she had to forfeit her even chance of even competing for the Olympics this year. And a lot of times we always hear that in a sports analogy. And with that, how thrilling is it to forfeit a game? It's disheartening. It hurts many. It's very disappointing. All the hard work and preparation, the sweat, all of that for a forfeit. It could hurt the whole team. It could be a baseball team, a football team. They say, you're going to forfeit this game. Our hearts go out sometimes to those who seemed innocently affected also by a forfeit. When we forfeit, we hand it over. It's nothing anymore. It didn't even count. So we hate it. Is a forfeit puts a win in someone else's column. And it's an automatic loss for us. It's treated like it never happened. In turn, do I want my whole life, no matter how many days I've spent on this earth, to be forfeited as it was nothing? I just forfeited my life, my opportunities. When you think of that picture, that's a very grim picture, what is described in the Bible as even hell, as outer darkness, and the heat, but also the torment, but also the inner torment in the minds of those who will have to replay over and over again all of those missed opportunities. No wonder they describe it as in the way they would do. And I know that if I could have been faithful, I should have seen it. And when it's a finality, it's a now, and I can't go back, and I can't do it over. Just give me a second chance to know that I have forfeited my life. Now that's torment that will never go away. And why won't it? Because God is not coming back. Hell is described as a total hopelessness. It means he's not changing his mind. He's not coming back over 10,000 years to say that, oh, I think you've learned your lesson now. Come and enjoy eternity forever. That's why it's totally hopeless. Now, how do you like your life now when it is described as the little vapor that we talked about this morning, about how little time that we have? And that's why the rich man begged to send Lazarus back to warn if his brothers. But if we forfeit something, we turn it over. It would have almost been better if we had never started to begin with. Your teams having to forfeit games to entire seasons. Of what? It's not following or breaking of the rules, getting caught in a violation. And forfeiting is no fun. So again, are we willing to give it all up? The life that we have is based on a forfeit? I would hope and pray not. And in Romans 12 tells us what we should do and for others, because the pattern is set. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, as I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Jumping down to verse 7 is our gift. It says, serving. If your gift is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. I like to highlight that in my Bible because it talks a little bit about me. If it is possible, because sometimes it's not. And as far as it depends on me, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome evil, but overcome evil with good. And we know that that is the crux of our lives now. Basically being able to show us in Romans chapter 12 of what we should be doing now and how we should be acting. And this is really the pattern that we should follow. And it tells us to be warned to not transform. We're supposed to transform our lives because we're not conforming to the world and what it has to offer. We offer an invitation, not out of necessity, but not out of repetition, but out of necessity to see if there's anything that we can do for you, that we can pray with you and for you, whatever is going on in your life. Maybe you've never obeyed the gospel, and we always want an opportunity, given that we can open that available, that everything is ready and prepared for you. If there is a need, if you have one now, if you'll come now as we stand and as we sing.